Actually, a nice kind of connection. Actually, oddly enough, the piece right before this in the issue was selected by Mary Beth to take a closer look at. And that was a friend of the podcast, Anna Genevieve Winham, her piece in Gallery 1, which was called By Jove. So that might be a nice transition there. So Mary Beth, if you wouldn't mind, kind of what stood out to you with the piece By Jove?
Well, there's so much that's interesting about this short piece. But the first thing that struck me was I had just had the great fortune of seeing the 4 moons of Jupiter really well for the first time in my life. And so when she started talking about Jupiter, I was just like, oh yeah, because it was just so amazing. And then the second thing that struck me was her line about her father, the father, Emma's father, wanting to name things, name the ships that went by in the channel or in the bay. And she said that most masculine of obsessions. And I found that really fascinating too, because I've thought a lot about why we name things. And, as someone who, sort of an amateur naturalist, I'm knowing the names of animals and plants. And when I go to visit a place, I'm always wanting to know. But then I'm also thinking, why do I think that knowing the name of that flower tells me anything at all? And so I've written about that a little bit. I wrote this piece about oyster catchers years ago, and in The Heart of the Sound, it's one of the chapters in that book where there's these birds I hang out with a lot in Prince William Sound, and just really knowing their names is like next to nothing. And even learning what you find out in a bird book or in a biology text is still just scratching the surface. Like mainly you just need to hang out with them and continually remove your human filters as much as possible. So that really struck me about this piece too, and the sort of masculine feminine thing going on there in terms of how we relate to the world. And how we think about intelligence, like what is knowledge? So she also has a line, the way 2 different knowledges felt, that Emma had this experience of knowing planets, but not until she actually saw them, that different knowledge base. And again, that, opens up this idea of all the different knowledge bases that exist, not only within the human community, but even further than that. And I also was reminded of a book that I read many years ago called The Names of Things, and it's kind of not very well known. Susan Brind Morrow, and the subtitle is A Passage in the Egyptian Desert. And so it's kind of a travel memoir about her time in Egypt. But she talks a lot about language. One, because she's trying to learn the Egyptian language, which is very different than English, but also because she's just thinking again about that question of what do the names of things mean? And how do we define that? So that was what really pulled me to this piece. And then the other thing, kind of funny, but also related, is the title, By Jove. For some reason, what popped into my head was that line from My Fair Lady, which is really by George instead of by Jove. But in my memory, it was by Jove, I think she's got it. When and that story, if you remember, is about taking this poor English woman who doesn't speak proper English and trying to teach her proper English and proper ways of being. So again, going back to that idea of like, what is knowledge, and how do we think we know anything at all as humans? I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I really like that you kind of landed on that kind of question after reading it. But yeah, any other thoughts on this one?
I definitely, I think that I don't think I could articulate it better than Mary Beth did, but I think, definitely the male-female thing going on there, I felt very strongly. And I especially liked the part about, I'm looking at it to make sure I quote it properly, but the quote is, moons weren't the shy children of the planets, but rather the Oedipal sons, trying always to escape their fathers, but being pulled into eternal return. And then talking about also the moon being trying to free herself from the narcissistic clutches, from the controlling clutches of a narcissistic mom. So I thought, that gives us a lot to sort of think about. Again, I seem to be focused on like pieces and stories that are able to kind of shift your perspective on things in pretty big ways. And I thought that those are two very different perspectives in a very, very close proximity to each other.
Right, yeah, and I don't want to push kind of too hard with kind of drawing similarities, but what I liked about this in combination with the previous image that we just looked at, Sunflower Cosmos, where it's kind of had the microscopic view and the cosmic view together. So we're kind of thinking about the family unit, family dynamics, family interactions, the kind of that familiar territory there, but then also considering one's place in the larger cosmic perspective. So there is that dynamic going on there, and obviously there's a lot of talk about planets and space, and even the word cosmos is used near the end or pretty close to the end of the piece, which sometimes I just go for a literal approach of placement of what to place next to what. So that was a nice a nice one. It made my job easy. I can just cosmos, put those together, and what do you know, they actually do intersect with some pretty interesting themes, as it turns out.
Another nice thing about that one, I don't have it in front of me, so I can't remember the name of the indigenous peoples that she talks about in there. What's their name? Anyhow, but that idea of traditional ecological knowledge is also important to think about in terms of what do we mean when we say we know something. And I love that their way of viewing things is that you can't say anything about it unless you're actually present. Like the line, when Columbus discovered America, well, were you actually there? Like, did you actually see that happen? I thought that was brilliant and really a powerful addition to this layered piece.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That just reminded me of my husband years ago published a book called The Clumsiest People in Europe. And it's about this woman, Mrs. Mortimer, a real woman who existed. And she wrote about all the countries of the world without ever having left her tiny town in Wales. And so she had all sorts of interesting ideas about, the Portuguese and this and that. It was just very funny. And the text was used to teach children about the countries of the world at one time. So anyway, I just happened to think of good old Mrs. Mortimer when you were saying, and you had to have been there because Mrs. Mortimer was never anywhere she talked about. Anyway, I digress.